We are going to begin now. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Expanding Access to Economic Mobility for Adult Learners webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to share a couple quick housekeeping tips. Attendees are muted, so please introduce yourself and meet fellow attendees in the chat box. This session is recorded and will be available for 90 days after the conference. There's also a survey that can be found on the events page within the virtual hub. We'll ask you to complete after the presentation. With that, I'd like to welcome Julia Lawton, Elizabeth Fisher, and Abe Donis of Achieving the Dream to begin the presentation.
Great, thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulties. We have been struggling to make sure everyone is in and can speak. So hopefully this will go much more smoothly moving forward. I'm hoping that my colleague Elizabeth Fisher can share her screen so that we can see the slides. My name is Julia Lawton. I'm really happy to be here with you virtually. I hope you've been enjoying the conference, whether you're attending virtually or in person. I am the Director of Program Administration at Achieving the Dream, which doesn't tell you that much, but what it means in practice is that my role is focused on our adult learners, our enrollment or access focused grants, and our community vibrancy work, which connects very much to our access agenda. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague Elizabeth Fisher, who is helping with the slides and the tech, and Dr. Abraham Dones, who is the Vice President of and the Chief Student Services Officer at Durham Technical Community College. So Elizabeth, I think we can see a couple of, we can see your whole screen. Just as a heads up, so next couple slides. Next one. Okay. So making sure that we're starting off on the right note, I just want to set the stage a little bit for why we're focused on adult learners and enrollment and expanding access for them. And so we know, as an organization, we know with the colleges that we work with across the country, which is over 300 community colleges, that higher education is not the only path to a better life, but is one of the critical paths that offers students a better life, an opportunity for social and economic mobility. And so this is an important part of the work that we're doing. And as you'll see on this slide, there's a lot of interest in that. While we may hear some narratives that that higher education isn't valued by the public, we actually see that particularly with community colleges, that's actually not the case. And so there's actually a lot of interest in the higher education potential that they have to offer. So next slide. And yet there are challenges. So, you know, when we're talking about adults, we're talking about people with very busy lives. If you think of yourself and your own life, there's a lot of things that can get in the way of seeking higher education, of seeking additional credentials, whatever level of education you have. It's a challenging thing to fit into a life where you're working, you're caring for others, and you're just being an adult having to pay bills. So we know that the cost of the degree or credential is really challenging for a lot of people, and you'll see that on this slide here. We know that work conflicts are challenging. You know, not everyone has a 9 to 5, not everyone works one job. There's a lot of people who have multiple different employers they're dealing with shift changes and everything, trying to really make sure that education fits within that is really challenging. We know there's a lot of emotional stress that goes with just being an adult, with also fitting college into this. So there's a lot of things that are connected to why adults are not enrolling or not re-enrolling if they've stopped out. Next slide. And so what we're trying to do with Achieving the Dreams work on access right now is move from a more reactive community colleges have open doors kind of approach to a more proactive approach to enrollment. And so what that means is that we go out there and actually meet adults where they are in the community, and we're much more hands-on in how we engage with them to get them to understand that we are built for them, and where we're not, that we're making changes in those areas, and that higher education can fit within their lives. And so we're really trying to take a much more proactive approach to that. And as I've said before, the words community vibrancy, this really does connect to the work that we're trying to move towards, which goes beyond just making sure that there's access to higher education, but also that there's access to opportunity, so that once adults complete their post-secondary education, they're able to get the careers that they would like to succeed in. But also they're able to contribute to their community. And so that when we're talking about community vibrancy, we're talking about the impact that individuals can have within their community as they're learning and earning and contributing themselves, but also how the college itself is able to contribute to the vitality, the vibrancy of the community. And so when we're talking about this, we're also trying to think and make sure that we're aware that, you know, equity, when we're talking about it, can sound like a buzzword, but really what it is very local and very personal. When we're talking about adults, we need to understand exactly who they are, what benefits and strengths they bring to our institution, and then what are some of those challenges that we put in their place, in their pathway, that make sure that they struggle. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we're looking at this through an intersectional lens, so that when we're focusing on adult learners, we're not just focusing on them as a monolith, but we really understand who it is we're serving, and what strengths and challenges that they have that they bring with them. Next slide. And so there's some very timeless, very simple things that we know that honestly all students need. That, you know, there's specifics that we know that adult learners need, but there's also very general lessons that we know that almost all students need. So one of those is consistency and continuity in information and people. So that means they're not having to move to different areas and getting different answers from different people, but they know someone that they can go to get their questions answered. They need to feel a sense of control over and access to their own information, to have their time respected, to only tell their story once. So again, they're not having to repeat some of their information over and over again to get the information that they need and to have the experience they need. To know who to call for answers is also very helpful. I mean, if you're thinking about your own experience, say calling an unnamed internet provider, for example, that, you know, if you have to keep moving from different department to different department, having to explain yourself to multiple different people can get really challenging and really stressful, and can be a massive time waste. And so really making sure that you know who you can call to get the answers that you need, and that you only have to tell that one person your story is really helpful. To have their questions answered, but not all at once. The fire hose style approach to orientation that a lot of institutions have is kind of challenging for a lot of students. It doesn't always work. It's not always helpful for those students, particularly when they've got a lot of other things going on. A lot of things going on in their mind at that time. It's challenging to retain that information. And then to receive information in a way that fits into their lifestyle. So that gets to the methodology in how you reach out to them, how you communicate with them, but also the way you're communicating it to. Next slide. Okay. So I'm going to share a little bit of a framework from one of our institutions that is in the ATD network. So next slide. Okay. So this is Dr. Gregory Hale's organizing framework focused specifically on access. And so there's 3 different areas of proximity that he identified, and we've added an additional one. And so there's physical proximity, social proximity, financial proximity, and practical proximity. And I'll go into a little bit of detail on what these are in the next couple slides. Okay, physical proximity may seem fairly easy and simple to understand. It gets to the importance of, place and space in higher education. And so when you're thinking about this, we're thinking about where you're teaching, where students are learning. And so we can think of things such as HyFlex and online teaching and learning. These are some strategies that we've seen within the physical proximity space across our network. And so we see a lot of colleges delivering classes at neighborhood partner sites. So specifically identifying the areas within their service area that are not connecting with well currently. And so what they do is identify partners that are physically located in those areas, and they deliver specific classes for specific programs in those locations so that they can bridge that gap between where the college is physically located and where the classes or the learning can take place to increase enrollment within those areas. That's one example. Next slide. Social proximity really speaks to whether the college is connecting with adults in their community. And so again, you can see some examples of what's happening at our campuses across the ATD network, but marketing campaigns, for example, that speak to adult learner goals and concerns. And we're not here just, it's important, but we're not just talking about making sure that adults are visibly represented in visuals related to marketing and communication. We're really making sure that the messages are speaking to the concerns and the goals of those adult learners. So are we connecting it to local career opportunities? Are we making sure that the language we're using is reaching the population we're focused on? And that particularly gets, may mean that we're adjusting some of the messaging and the language that we're using for different areas. Next slide. So financial proximity, again, this one might seem very simple, but it really is talking much more than just making sure that fees and tuition are paid. It's making sure that you can live as a student while you're studying. And we know, obviously, that is goes way beyond just books and fees and tuition. It goes into making sure that you're able to afford to eat. It goes into making sure you're able to afford healthcare, for example. And so the financial proximity piece really encourages colleges to think of this as a more comprehensive, cohesive, holistic understanding of financials related to higher education. So we're not just talking about those tuition and fees, which, is a big chunk and a really important piece, but not the only piece. Next slide. And so practical proximity, which is the one we added, is really talking about whether it makes sense for college to fit within the lifestyle of an adult. And so there's again a lot of examples here of what colleges are doing to try and do that. But it's making sure, for example, that schedules are built to fit within working adult schedules. So understanding like that they may have multiple jobs, that they may be working shifts, that they may not have control over their schedules, that their schedules may change over like week on week. It also gets to things like shortened academic terms, which is something Achieving the Dream has been working on quite a bit over the last few years, actually, to make sure that, you know, if there's an opportunity for someone to take multiple courses within one academic term, that they can then, there's multiple off ramps and on ramps that are built within those. Okay. Okay. So now here's the technology test. Dr. Dones was not able to join us before, but hopefully you are able to speak and be here. I see your smiling face, so hopefully you're properly with us.
I'm finally in. Yay!
Wonderful.
So good afternoon, all. I think this statement here is very telling that you really can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. And I use that context, and you can move it to the next slide as it relates to adult learner work. And so I think these are some probing questions for you to start asking yourself when it comes to how do we best support and serve adult learners. Number one, do you have an idea of what that looks like at your institution? And number two, has the college really created a support system for adult learners, and as it relates to retaining them and graduating them, and the complexities that come along with that population? Next slide. So this kind of work is grounded in these questions for us at Durham Tech. And so this was a snapshot for us back in 2021. When we started this work, we took a look at what our current enrollment and completions were during the fall 20 and spring 2021 terms. Adult learners are defined as ages 25 and up here at the college. And then you can see from here that we not only just looked at our curriculum students, but we also took into account our continuing education students. And you'll see a little later why. But here are some statistics to share with you all on kind of where we've started with some of this work to ground us. If you want to move to the next slide, we can move forward with the content and the conversation. So part of our strategic plan is not only 60% completion of all of our students, but an 80% placement in livable wage jobs after students complete with us. One of the strategies that we incorporated when we started this work is how do we identify which adult population we wanted to focus on? And what we recognize is that we needed to focus on adult learners who started with us but never completed a credential. Those that invested some type of time, effort, energy to come to us, to get through some of our processes, which at times can be very challenging depending on who you're talking to, and focus on getting them back to us so we can try to move forward. And we did this with a two-prong approach and with the support of the John and Belk Endowment, who supported us financially here at the college at that time, where we utilized two support systems. One of them was Inside Track. And Inside Track is an agency that uses a framework to really identify and recruit students back who had stopped out, and really trying to get those students to understand that their academic journeys may have been impacted by some life circumstance. And so we took a deep dive into our data to look at the numbers. And at that point in time, we referred around 2,600 students to Inside Track, and Inside Track maxed themselves like they were Durham Tech employees and started to engage students on a campaign to bring them back to campus. The effort here was, how do we lift up the significance of what we're trying to do by tying in it and connecting it to how we relate to students? And basically what we did is come back to us to get more education, to get a better job. That was kind of the underlying tone and messaging that we used. Next slide, please. And so not only did we want to focus on our curriculum students, we then had an opportunity to engage another agency called Vision Point Marketing and basically developed a marketing campaign around short-term credentialing and named it Better Skills, Better Jobs. And we focused on kind of three industries: plumbing, community health worker, and biotechnology. Interestingly enough, the community health worker at that time, we were developing a option for the community health worker program to be provided in Spanish because we have a pretty large native Spanish speaking population. And there was some work that needed to be done around there, especially during this time. We talked about COVID and its impact and wanted to make sure that we were creating opportunity not only to benefit an individual as it relates to the credentialing, but also now benefit the community and the work that needs to happen. At that point in time, we have referred Vision Point to 3,000 continuing education students that were somehow connected with us some way, somehow, but then created this back to work opportunity for them to re-enroll them and get them through our door. Out of that, 225 came back to us and enrolled in the community health worker, biotechnology, and plumbing program. Next slide, please. So through this re-engagement recruitment effort, the other thing that we recognized is that we had students that had accumulated a certain amount of credits with us that actually had completed some type of credentialing. And at that time, we didn't have a really robust system to administratively graduate students. So several things needed to take place. And I'd be very, I want to be very clear that you need to look at your policies, your practices, and the institution and what you're doing in order to create opportunity to advance some of this work. So one of the steps that we took is we decided to develop an administrative graduation procedure under one of our policies, and therefore allowing us to review students' records that may not have declared a specific program of study when they came to us, but that they satisfied those credentials throughout their time with us, and therefore the administrative graduation process allowed us to graduate 409 students. And out of that 409 students, there were 682 credentials awarded because some of our programs that we offer are stackable credentials. So some of them earn certificates. For instance, an example would be under the IT certification and associate applied science degrees. So that's why you see the number of credentials higher than the actual number of students that had completed. Of those 409 students, 247 of them were 25 years of age. If you don't know, in North Carolina, we have a agenda goal of by 2030, we'll have 2 million individuals with some type of higher education credentialing to meet the workforce demand. Right now, we're not meeting the target goals to meet that goal. So this became very important to us because we felt this was a way for us to contribute as one of the colleges within the system towards that 2030 goal of higher education attainment for residents of the state of North Carolina. And then as you can see, of the 247 adult learners that we credentialed, 160 of them were students of color, which is a large population of the American student. And then 62 of them were male. So just giving some context as to who we were identifying in this cohort. Next slide, please. Finally, the biggest endeavor that we took upon was not only now working towards completing credentialing for adult learners, but making sure that we were landing them in the workforce where they needed to be, of course, to advance their economic mobility, to support the needs of their family, but at the end of the day, also contributing back to the very community that we're a part of. And so we involved our career services and our career center in this process, that these same individuals that not only we were recruiting back, but that we were administratively graduating, we were trying to make a connection between these individuals, their desires and wishes of where they were trying to go. Most of these adult learners were already working individuals in a different industry, and they wanted a different career option or opportunity. And so through that collaboration and through that marketing effort, we basically focused on the three areas that I mentioned earlier. And the reason why we focused on those areas is because if you look at the earning potential at that time, this has probably shifted and changed drastically since that time that this was produced. this was a real opportunity and game changer for many of our adult learners who may not have been making that type of money at that time. And some of them had identified that they were working maybe 2 jobs to make ends meet for their family. So we were really trying to create some opportunity for them to gain some advancement and an edge on how they could possibly maybe work 1 job and fulfill other obligations as it relates to their life circumstances and what they had going on around them. Next slide, please. We also, very important to consider using data to inform how you move this work forward. And as you can see here, our demographics by race and ethnicity. The top graph is Durham Tech. The bottom graph is a representation of the state of North Carolina across all 58 community colleges. And as you can see, we have a much more higher percentage of students of color versus the overall system, which we appreciate, we love. We enjoy the diversity of that population, but we also now realize that we're positioned to really make a difference in how we contribute to the economic factors around our students of color, mainly our Black and Brown and Latinx students here at the college. If you go to the next slide, we decided to break that down now also by age. And as you can see, Durham Tech has a higher percentage of adult learners in the curriculum sector. This is only curriculum in these graphs right now. So it heightened our importance of focusing on that demographic of population because it is very significant as it relates to the overall work that we wanted to achieve. And if we're looking at our overall goal and our strategy of enrollment persistence and graduation, persistence and graduation, we needed to make sure that we were diverting our attention to ensuring that adult learners are being supported and served in a better way than we had previously. Next slide, please. Again, we did the same thing for our continuing education enrollment. And I apologize because these 2 graphs are the exact same replication of each other. So if you go to the next one, you can see a little better how continuing education enrollment at the college is very different than the state, but it's also very different than our credit programming, our curriculum programming. We have about 55% of adult learners here at the Durham Tech who are pursuing continuing education. Makes pretty much sense because that is a focus area of upskilling individuals as it relates to not only their current employment, but where there's opportunity for them to maybe gain some new skills to advance either in a different career. And so we strategically focused on not only curriculum, but we then had to focus and shift attention on the continuing education. And the biggest shift here was the mindset of the institution, because at that same time, we were moving towards a one college model. And I need to be clear when I say one college. One college does not mean that every student is experiencing Durham Tech the same way. Unfortunately, because the way the system is set up, we have different processes for a student to enroll on the continuing education that's very different from an application and enrollment process for curriculum. So from the very door, those populations are experiencing very different journeys through our onboarding process. Nevertheless, that should not remove us from being responsible to ensure that the experience of our students, regardless of whether they're continuing education or curriculum, are not as fulfilling and satisfying as it relates to them experiencing Durham Tech and what we're able to offer them. Some of the things that we decided to do strategically is how do we create more financial supports and opportunities for continuing education students that aren't afforded the same options as curriculum students. For example, CU students are eligible for FAFSA if they fit that criteria, right? Continuing educations were not. Continuing education students are not. And so therefore we decided to reach out to our county, which some of our finances come from, and we developed a continuing education grant for students to be able to utilize. And if they meet the criteria of living within the county, then they become eligible to receive tuition waived coursework, and even sometimes at times book stipends to support adult learners to be interested in pursuing some type of short-term credentialing through continuing education. Next slide, please. And then what we decided to do in 2023 is do a comparison, because we realized that, prior to COVID, we knew that there were some impacts of students of losing enrollment, and we wanted to see where we were from 2019 fall till which is a pre-COVID semester to at this time 2023 fall. Our numbers continue to increase because we've haven't had enrollment growth for the past 2 years. So I know this will look very differently once once we get an updated snapshot of what this these tables reflect and look like. But as you can see, we really had some great progression between the 2022 fall to the 2023 fall year. But if we, which was one academic year, and then even greater for one term. But if you looked at from 2019 fall to 2023 fall, you could see that we were still below where we were at that time. And so these were things that we wanted to focus on. And we knew that the adult learner population was a significant contributor to that data. And for many different reasons, many individuals had to stay home because they had to take care of family, they had to take care of other obligations, maybe taking care of a parent at that time. All of these different factors that contributed to a decline in enrollment of those specific populations. Can go to the next slide. And then right here, we broke it down demographically. So as you can see in that last column on the top, we were losing out from our Black student population, our African-American student population, still trying to make some gains. And even our white student population. The one population of student that returned to us quicker than others was our Hispanic and Latina student population. But then if you look at the age differences and the age categories, you can see that it was the range of students between the age of 25 and 44, where we were seeing a big loss. And of course, the numbers were staggering at that time for us. So we were really concerned on making sure that we were addressing specific needs to focus on the adult learner, because we wanted to make sure that those percentages were getting smaller and smaller from year to year. Next slide. We also did it by pathway. We have 7 pathways here at Durham Tech because we wanted to see where the big shift was. And as you can see, our health and wellness pathway kind of rebounded pretty quickly. Our human services and public safety, which is a safety concern for our community in general, because of what we produce as it relates to paramedics, individuals who are certified to be in the police force, fire rescue, all of those different types of industries. We were seeing a really big dip in who was coming back to us. And typically in that pathway of human services and public safety, you have a very large demographic of adult learners. Next slide, please. So right here, what we decided to do is kind of look at the first year progression by age number. And this is the success rate by cohort for Durham Tech. And what you can see here is that 25 to 44 range and that 45 to 64 range. Number one, the 45 to 64 is the highest performing range back in fall 2021. And then third on that list would be the 25 to 44. So we also looked at the factor that these are students who are really staying with us and progressing. And so we needed to keep that momentum going. So again, enhancing and improving upon the support services that we provide to individuals. Next slide, please. And so what are some things that we're hoping that you will take away from this conversation? And here's some very quick 5 pointers that we can look to is set the tone across your campus and throughout the community. And what we decided to do is we decided not to call this an initiative. We decided to make sure this was part of the enrollment strategic plan of the college, that we need to focus on adult learners. Some of our sister institutions have developed adult centers. I don't have the capacity yet to do that because I need the space for it. But we really shifted the mentality of not calling this initiative. How do we make this a staple program that every individual who works at the college understands that there is a critical and important need to address as it relates to our adult learner students who are coming through our doors, especially because of the demographic and significance of the population that they represent here. I think number two is you need to identify some champions at your institutions to focus on the adult learner work. Um, for many of us, and unfortunately, I don't know everybody on this call, we are adult learners. I don't know about you, but I was an adult learner when I earned my master's degree and when I earned my doctoral degree. So we should be a lot more sensitive and aware and keen of the experiences of adult learners. And therefore, we should be championing that work, especially if it's our lived experience. And so creating that team and having that group really focus on the experience of adult learners and allowing that team to be spread out throughout the college is extremely important. Bring faculty in, bring employees in, bring administrators in, and create a strong team that you're going to advocate for adult learner work at your institution. I can't overemphasize the leveraging of additional funds. In order to make this work, we're going to have to invest some finances into how we improve the supports for adult learners. How do we increase the services for adult learners? And this can happen depending on your institution and in very different ways. An example here is that we established success coaches and a success coach framework at Durham Tech. And we made sure that our success coaches understood the imperative behind ensuring that adult learners were part of their caseload and part of the students that they were supporting once those students were in a pathway. If you don't involve adult learners in the conversations of the work that you're trying to accomplish at the college, then why are we here? Make them a part of the process. Make sure their voices are heard. Make sure they're providing you with insights on their experiences. And each one of us, there's promising practices that we can incorporate here, but we also have to be very sensitive to the demographic of students and the service areas where we're located, because every adult learner population is going to be very different. The jobs and the industries in those service areas are going to be very unique to the institution which is served. So you have to be very mindful and conscious of the specific students within your service area that you're supporting. And then the final thing that I will always challenge any institution and try to make sure that you improve your enrollment and onboarding processes. I can't express how challenging that was for the adult learner. And let's be clear, adult learners don't have time to waste. And adult learners don't have the luxury of waiting for somebody to get back to them in a few days. If they're on your campus, they want to get things done because they're on a tight schedule. And if you can't provide them with that level of support and care, they're going to walk back to their car, get back in their car, and they're going somewhere else. And many times it's back home because they just don't have the time to waste. Next slide. This is a reference resource that I'm going to highly recommend. The Belk Center at North Carolina State University, who focuses on community college research, has developed an adult learner guidebook. It is a book that you can utilize at your institutions as a workbook. That team that I talked about earlier, great resource to hand them, because what it'll help you do is start evaluating what your institution is doing as it relates to adult learners. Next slide, please.
All right, Dr. Donis, we have a couple minutes left, and we have a couple questions in the chat,
Sure.
Julia and Dr. Donis. The first question is, how can nonprofit organizations and industry professional associations partner with community colleges and other educational institutions to support learning outcomes?
Oh, they're staple. Your community-based organizations, all your community organizations, they're staple. Your industry and business, if you don't incorporate them into what their needs are, then you're losing out on the opportunity to enhance the learning that's taking place in either your curriculum or your continuing education coursework, in order to ensure that you're aligning the learning objectives that you need to execute versus what the demand in the industry is. There has to be a connection, and there has to be a correlation between what we're doing at our institutions and all of these organizations within our community.
All right, and then the second question we have here from the chat is, are you connected with workforce partners, job centers, and workforce boards?
Yeah, so fortunately in North Carolina, the construct is already there for us. So that phenomenon and that practice is not unknown. But you have to be very intentional with those boards and those organizations and those entities. And if the construct of your community college system is not the case, then you need to build those relationships. If you have a Center for Workforce Engagement, get them connected, right? If you have apprenticeships and internships, connect with those agencies that are providing those opportunities and try to expand that network to maybe other industries or other businesses within that local service area that you may have not connected with yet. I guarantee you that every business out there and every industry, they want talent. And you're the producer of that talent. So how do you capitalize on that opportunity to make those connections? And it might take some work, but it's worth the investment because at the end of the day, it's the students that benefits from your ability to create those partnerships and those networks. Because if they're getting the jobs, not only is that a brand for your institution, but then that creates a stronger partnership between that entity and yourself.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today with Dr. Donis from Durham Tech and with Julia Lawton from Achieving the Dream for expanding access to economic mobility for adult learners. Have a great rest of your time at the conference.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And just one more reminder to fill out surveys after all of the sessions. Thank you all.